War is going to happen regardless of what you think about it because it's a very human activity. So when I found that out, I realized that if I didn't do something about gender, that gender idiots are going to kill us all. And that's not an exaggeration. They're going to do that because they don't know what they're doing. They are activist mystics. They are activists operating on a kind of mysticism that if you say the right words as a magical formula, then you can convince people, linguistically draw us into their ideas. Gender is really good at that, right? Transgender, what is that? Trans woman, what is that? And then the pronouns. So pronouns are rohypnol. What is going on there? That's the use of language to try and do magic on our mind.
You must be some kind of therapist.
Today I get to welcome back Matt Osborne, who originally appeared on previous episodes 39 and 101. He is a conflict historian who has entered the gender critical movement. He's a writer at The Distance magazine, as well as a book reviewer for GenSpect. Matt, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Hi, Stephanie. It's good to be back.
So I enjoyed getting to meet you in person at the GenSpect conference in Albuquerque in 2025. It was really nice to see everyone, all these people we've met online. And one thing that I enjoy about being, I guess, what you could say part of a movement, right, part of the gender critical movement, is that we have people from so many different walks of life and so many different personal and professional backgrounds that have led us into this movement, where we then utilize those personal and professional backgrounds in a variety of ways, contributing our stories, our expertise, our perspective. And so it's just such a fascinating way to connect with people. And your angle is history, which I've said before and I'll say again is not my best subject. In fact, while we were doing our behind the scenes banter before we started recording, everything that you study is outside of my wheelhouse, typically, except for where we intersect on the gender issue. So I guess a good question to open with is, what is a military historian doing in the gender critical movement?
Well, again, thank you for having me, Stephanie. And I will start with a brief anecdote. I left the Democratic Party in 2018 because I wasn't down for this sterilizing kids and cheating at sports stuff. And I decided to get a master's degree in military history because it was an interesting topic area. It's always been an interest of mine. And I asked a military historian professor, tenured professor, for a reading list on origins of war and primitive warfare. And he said, sure, he provided me the list. And then he said that he no longer teaches these topics. And the reason is that female freshmen and female department heads get very upset when you tell them that sex difference is real and important, because warfare is driven by sex difference. It is built into our DNA. We do not have wars just because rich people say so. That is a lie that has been told to us for generations. And it's not true. The reality is that war happens because human beings gonna human. There were anthropologists who found Stone Age societies in the 60s and recorded them on film having war. And the death rates in these primitive wars are as horrendous as some of the most awful modern wars, actually. If Americans had killed the residents of Vietnam at the rate the Gabusi tribe was killing each other at the same moment, there would be no one left alive in South Vietnam. So this is a topic that defies the sort of narrative that let's call it the left liberal sphere, right, wants to believe that war is something that can be prevented through proper action, proper thoughts, proper attitudes, but none of that is true. War is going to happen regardless of what you think about it because it's a very human activity. So when I found that out, I realized that if I didn't do something about gender, if I didn't turn around, sort of like the hero in a Western who has tried to get away from the conflict and gets dragged back into the conflict. You see that trope all the time in the movies. And it was like that. I realized that if I didn't come back and do something to help win this fight, that gender idiots are going to kill us all. And that's not an exaggeration. Um, they're going to do that because they don't know what they're doing. They are activist mystics. We live in a time with lots of these people. They are activists operating on a kind of mysticism that if you say the right words as a magical formula, then you can convince people, right? And you see this all the time. These efforts to just sort of linguistically draw us into their ideas. Gender is really good at that, right? Transgender, what is that? Trans woman, what is that? And then the pronouns. Pronouns are rohypnol. There's that. I can't remember the name of the writer who wrote that. It's a very clever line. And what is going on there? That's the use of language to try and do magic on our minds. And that's what we live with. It happens all the time now. We're surrounded by it. And it's a very dangerous way to make policy for a lot of people because you're going to run smack dab into reality. And you're going to have conflicts with reality. You're never going to defeat reality with words. It just doesn't work that way. So that is the story of how a military historian came to take part in the gender critical movement. And I would say that actually it has been a good basis on which to start, because having been through a program where I had to be able to look into the void, stare right into the void of really horrible topics, right? Just terrible topics. And be able to look and not blink, and be able to diagnose what is going on from the facts without any kind of emotional investment in who is who. I mean, who really cares in a battle that happened 500 years ago, right? Who cares what side they're on? So for me, it was a good grounding. It set me up for success as far as I'm concerned. It made me a better reader, a better writer, and a better analytical mind.
So having that history background helped you see more clearly what was happening in front of you at this particular moment in history.
Yes, particularly because in order to study military history, you do, to some degree, have to study ideology. And I already had a degree. My undergraduate is political science. So I had a background in political philosophy and the history of political philosophy. And it got deeper, and I've deepened it even further since I graduated. So, yes, it's been very helpful to have that background and understanding. When we talk about Marxism, you'll hear this word all the time. What is that? Well, it helps to know that Marx was a mystic. It helps to know that actually, if you think of him as a religious nut job, Marx makes a lot more sense. Anytime you questioned Marx, if you ever argued with him or debated with him, he would switch to metaphysics because he was doing religion and not science. And so, again, we're surrounded by these kind of quasi-religious ideas. We don't recognize them as such. And so that really opened my eyes. I had gender in one half of my mind, and I had ideology in the other half of my mind. And at some point I went, oh, wait a minute, this is the same thing. This is the same thing going on. So that was very helpful to me.
One thing I enjoy about talking to people outside of my field is when they give themselves permission to speak very freely. I am so kind of still stuck with the habit in some ways from my years as a therapist, even though I do work now that's very aligned with my mission. I talk to RGD parents as a coach, and I speak pretty freely, but I'm still hesitant to make hyperbolic statements that anyone could try to um, could try to interpret uncharitably. So I find it a little refreshing when I hear you say things like gender idiots will kill us all. 'Cause I don't know that I would give myself permission to say that. When you say that, what do you mean? Given what you know from that historical perspective, if people like you and I don't say something, or if we're not successful in our efforts, where do you see this nonsense leading?
I see, first of all, that it is going to debilitate the American society in terms of our ability to defend ourselves, first of all, which means that the whole world is going to have uh, more powerful societies that do not share American values. They will be more powerful in comparison to us. And some people want that. And most of those people, I'm not saying all, but most of those people who actually want that, they tend to be on the other side of the gender issue. And so one of the things that's going to happen is that you'll see a hollowing out of the armed forces. That's what happened during the Biden years. The enforcement of gender ideology in the Pentagon led to a crash in recruitment. And what happened when Pete Hegseth came into office and banned transgender service, you saw a sudden overload. There are too many recruits. Recruiting is through the roof. There's no shortage of recruits. Why is that? It's because military families were not down for the trans clown. That was a really big factor in what was going on in recruiting those 4 years. So, first of all, you're debilitating our abilities to defend ourselves. Okay. And then what you're doing is you're inserting an ideology into the military. And what happens when militaries become ideological is they spend all of their time on ideology instead of training. You can see this in the Chinese example. If you are a Chinese officer, you will spend about a quarter of your time indoctrinating or being indoctrinated. So that removes time from when you could be working with your soldiers or sailors, working on maintenance, working on issues that have to do with actual military application. So that's two ways that it debilitates us. And another way that it debilitates us is that if you send transgender soldiers to war, you're going to have the problem of medically dependent people being captured and becoming POWs. So now you're going to have a hostage situation. Just imagine, because we're, watching what's happening in Iran, but just imagine that Iran had a transgender soldier in their clutches right now. And they were saying this person will not get hormones without some sort of negotiated settlement, right? So it would be one more form of pressure. Now, a prisoner is bad enough in enemy hands, but when you imagine someone who is medically dependent in enemy hands, it takes a whole new level of awful. And then you have the problem of if you are a soldier who is required to tell the truth, and that is very important. You have to be able to tell someone who is a superior bad news, because if you can't say bad news honestly, everybody's going to be in trouble. And you'll have the enemy sneak up on you because someone didn't say what they saw. And what happens is that when you put two soldiers together and one of them has to lie about the other, if I'm required to lie and say that this man is a woman, that has effects on morale. That has severe effects on morale. And we know that because the military community did not like it. Most recruits in the military, America's military, are middle class, not poor. And most of them come from military families, which means multi-generational. So what you had was the generations past that had served telling young people, don't join. I wouldn't join this. And then we had a new administration, And whether you like it or not, I'm not telling you to like the administration. I'm saying when the new administration came in, suddenly the floodgates are unleashed. So there are multiple ways in which it affects our readiness, in which it affects our ability to defend ourselves. Okay, well, now let's consider the broader picture. If the United States is less able to defend itself when we are attacked, actually, in military history, that means that we are far more likely to strike out with weapons that are not human, things like nuclear bombs. So you actually raise the chances of nuclear Armageddon by having transgender service. And I know that some people will probably argue with me on this, but I can lay out the decline and fall of armies in history, and it always starts with politics. It always starts with a lie. So every time you hear somebody talking about transgender service in terms of a right to serve, just remember that there's no right to serve. You don't have a right to join the army. You don't have a right to join the Navy. That's not a right. They are able to select, right? That's why we don't have people in wheelchairs joining the army. The military is allowed to discriminate in that way. And one of the ways that they have returned to discrimination is that we are discriminating out men who have a disabling paraphilia. We are screening out women who have a disabling medicalization. And it's not anti-trans, it is pro-service, it is pro-military, it is pro-lethality, because there's only one job that a military has. And people want to say that the military is for this and that and the other thing. It has one job. It has to kill our enemies and break their stuff. It doesn't have any other job. So anything that detracts from that job detracts from the military mission. And it's not like Pete Hegseth says it and it stops being true because he says it. It is true whether or not he says it. So there's your short answer. I could probably go on for a while about that, but we don't have all day.
I'm able to simultaneously hear what you're saying from my current worldview and from a more perhaps naively optimistic one that says, "Whoa, Matt, kill our enemies and destroy their stuff, huh? That's not very peaceful of you. That's you sound like a real jerk wanting to kill our enemies. Who are you to believe that we should have enemies in the first place, right?" So that utopian lens, right from the outset of our conversation, you talked about realizing the inevitability of war and that conflict is something that we have always done and will always continue to do as far as we know, being humans on planet Earth. So there's that more utilitarian lens that says, well, if conflict is an ugly fact of life, then we might as well be prepared to defend ourselves and go into things with eyes wide open, alert to the possibility that no matter how utopian our own personal worldview might be, that we can't count on everyone else on the planet to share that same worldview. There will always be bad actors, and there will be bad actors who specifically target our utopian ideals or anything else that can be considered a weakness. But I'm just sort of hearing what you're saying side by side with the people who take offense to it as if you're promoting war, as if you're saying it should be this way. And I think this is one of the major distinctions that I work on with the parents that I coach as well, is the is versus ought. Because so many young people are still in that idealistic phase of the world ought to be the way I say it should be in my utopian paradise that I want to live in. And if you say the world is some other way, that means that you think it ought to be the way that you're saying it is. And I have a problem with you now because, there's just so much of that youthful idealism that we run into with the young people.
I would say you're right on. Absolutely. Yes, I don't propose that we should go starting wars everywhere, right? I'm not pro war. What I'm saying is that wars happen and you must prepare. You must be ready because the stakes are so high. You can't afford to lose. And if you do, for example, if you consider Afghanistan a loss, then you want to lose in a way that the problem does not end up right next door, does not end up on your doorstep. It's fine to lose Afghanistan and leave Afghanistan, and Afghanistan still be where it is. The problem comes when Afghanistan ends up in the United States. And you know, we can argue about immigration, but really, it's not. I'm not talking about immigration. I'm talking about the effect of having um, an enemy that is close versus far, right? And you would rather lose to a faraway enemy than a very close enemy. Um, and ultimately, the stakes are too high. Victory is too important. Imagine a world where the Allies lost World War II. There are people who want to imagine a world where the Allies lost World War I. That might be different, but World War II, imagine Nazi Germany in charge of Europe. That would be a bad thing. Um, there are 1,000 examples in history of civilizations that were made possible by grim men with weapons carving out a place for it to exist. And there are as many civilizations that have fallen because the men got soft and stopped being able to protect the civilization. This is an old story. One of the most important historians of all time, a man named Ibn Khaldun, he was an Arab who lived in North Africa, and he saw this happen. And he actually is the person that to whom we owe this idea of history as cycles. He is the one who came up with this idea that hard times make hard men make good times make soft men, and then soft men make hard times. That's what we owe to him. And he observed it in real time. And not only did he observe it, but he was the rare historian who actually did it. He led men into battle. So, there's plenty of history to look at that poses this picture of reality that you have to be willing to have people standing by to hurt other people and break their stuff. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to get killed and they're going to break your stuff. One of those two things is going to happen. And you don't necessarily have to have every war. You can, in fact, prevent war by ensuring that your potential enemy is deterred. You see that right now with China. China, we're talking about now whether they're going to cross the Taiwan Strait. Okay. Well, if there's no gasoline for China's fleet, then they're not going to be crossing the Taiwan Strait. So, what the Trump administration is doing right now is trying to lock down that shadow fleet that supplies China with oil. It's all very complex, but you deter the possibility of violence by showing your willingness to do violence, effective. That's the important thing. It has to be effective violence. And whether or not you agree with this particular situation or that particular situation where someone is using violence, my question is, are they using it effectively? And are they using it to effectively produce changes? Because the idea that the world is better off peaceful all the time is just not true. I mean, right now you're looking at a regime in Iran that killed 50,000 of their own people, probably, at least the last 25 years, probably twice that many since it came into existence. So, my question is, what actually is the better, what is the real good there? What is the better option? to let that regime stay there doing that and doing that to their neighbors and doing that to us, or to take action. Now, you might disagree with me about this, but it's an equation of action versus inaction. And the idea that inaction will produce a more peaceful and calm and rational world is just not true. It's not borne out by history.
I don't know who coined the term suicidal empathy, but that's coming to mind when I think about the mindset that I've spent so much time studying here. The mindset I was just describing to you, and I think another manifestation of that mindset is, I mean, it's so ironic and layered and privileged. But it's this naive mentality that, we'd be better off being conquered by enemies, right? That America is so corrupt, that Western civilization is so, just evil, oppressor, colonizers, that, I think the mentality of these young woke people is like that, better the devil that you don't know, really. That's that's the problem, right? It's like they can
Yes.
find all the flaws, the real and imagined and distorted flaws of America or Western civilization, but then there's this huge naive gap in that thinking that's like, "Oh, just because we're not perfect, that means the opposite of us or our enemies or those who disagree with us, uh, are better," right? And we should be conquered by them, which just leaves like a huge, huge glaring hole in our ability to defend ourselves.
Right. And you have to be able to defend yourself. And I use this not just physically, but in mental terms. If somebody comes along and calls you names or smears your good name, right? You have to be able to defend yourself. You may choose to be the bigger person and not defend yourself, but you have to be able to, because if it's not a choice, if it's just weakness, then people will just walk all over you. You have to be able to still stand up on your hind legs and defend yourself. So it's one thing to say, I'm going to take the high road. But it is really not true that uh, being pacifistic will somehow make your life more easy. It's actually going to make your life harder. Not being able to stick up for yourself in a meeting, not being able to stick up for yourself at work, not being able to stick up for yourself in an interaction. And that doesn't mean you start a fight. It doesn't mean that you have to escalate. It just means that you have to be able to take care of yourself, to stand up to bullies. I personally think that part of our problem with these youth, and you may disagree, is that when we didn't really get rid of it, but when we got rid of bullying, what happened is that kids never learned to deal with bullies. And so you have young men, especially, who are not sure of themselves. They've never been in a fight, right? So it's like they don't know themselves. They don't know their own limitations. They don't know their own abilities. And one of the things that you find in, for example, Brazilian jiu-jitsu training is that it brings the ego into alignment with reality, because you are forced to tap out many, many times. You lose so many matches as you learn the art of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I'm not into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but I've listened and read these stories from people about how you must learn to accept that you're going to lose matches all the time. You're going to lose and lose and lose. And so you have that humiliation all the time, and it makes you calm. It makes you capable of just putting up with people who throw an insult at you. It makes you less violent. It makes you a more peaceful person when you train to be able to use violence effectively. And I had that same experience when I started shooting. I got a pistol, and I learned to shoot it, and I took part in competitions. And not only did my self-confidence increase, I wasn't even carrying the pistol, but just, I would walk into a Walmart and I did not feel the same. I felt more confident just out in public as a result of my newfound ability to defend myself, to carry a gun if I wanted to. I had a carry permit, um, but I usually didn't. Just having the ability, I felt calmer. I felt more in tune with everything that was going on around me. I wasn't anxious. So yeah, it is a real change in the human mind when you are able to defend yourself, when you are able to stick up for yourself. Um, and it's part of becoming an adult, I think, that we have to learn to do that.
And for those who struggle with this, the first step is recognizing aggression. That might not be hard for you, Matt, right? But I know plenty of people for whom just that basic level of awareness that this person's messing with me. They're trying to take something from me. They're playing a zero-sum game and I am their opponent, right? Even if I am subjectively experiencing life as a positive sum cooperative game, uh, recognizing and quickly when someone else is playing a zero-sum game where they're trying to win while you lose, right? Like it requires the ability to recognize aggression in its various forms and switch gears. And I think a lot of people struggle just even with that.
Yes, and you've actually just hit on something really important that is in our topic area. It's testosterone. The thing that testosterone does to boys is makes them acutely aware of status, of hierarchy. You have a young man who is suddenly impulsive, suddenly striking out more than he was before. And that's because the testosterone has come on in his adolescence, and now he feels his place in the social pecking order so much more severely than he did before. And I wonder sometimes, what is that doing to the girls, right? Because girls, a female is not a male, and the socialization is different, but it's also biology, right? So you put testosterone in a girl, you're making her suddenly more aware of hierarchy. You're making her more impulsive. And so, yeah, it's one of the health effects of testosterone on females. And when you don't give testosterone to a boy, if you block his testosterone, he might not ever learn to defend himself. He might not learn to stick up for himself. So, these are things that I've been thinking about in terms of not just military history, but in terms of gender and the ideology therein. And if you ask, if you drill deep down and start scratching under the surface, you will find that usually, in most cases, gender ideology uh, it does have a pacifist component. The world will be safer and less violent when we get rid of the toxic masculinity, right? But actually, good masculinity, is capable of effective violence because that is how we protect ourselves from violence, from impulsive violence, from those who are not so grown up as the rest of us. Um, if you want to fight somebody, right? And then you walk into the room and you find a person who's a foot taller than you and 50 pounds heavier, you're not going to attack that person because you're intimidated by their ability to hurt you, right? And if you sense, or if someone who is looking to hurt you senses that you are dangerous, that you might stick up for yourself and know what you're doing, they will tend to leave you alone. Criminals, for example, are looking for easy marks. Someone who, comes along and mugs you, let's say, Stephanie, that person is going to do that because they think you're an easy mark. They think that all they have to do is threaten you and you'll give them whatever you've got. And if somebody puts a gun in your face, you'll probably just give them your stuff because that's the smart thing, right? But if somebody is just attacking you in that way, or intimidating you, or threatening you, not being able to stick up for yourself means you're going to get robbed a lot. You're going to get robbed all the time, because uh, criminals have a sixth sense, sort of, so to speak, about who is the easy mark. And you can hear criminals actually talk about it, or read criminals talking about it, how you get on the subway and you walk into the subway car, and you're looking for the one who will be easy, right? You're not looking for a tough guy to fight with. You're looking for someone who can't fight back. So the ability to fight back, just projecting the ability to fight back, is a defense in and of itself.
Your trans-identified kid won't listen to reason, because reason isn't what they need right now. They need a parent who knows how to communicate in an empathic yet strategic manner. ROGD Repair gives you over 120 lessons in the psychology and communication tools that actually work when normal parenting doesn't. Plus, RepairBot, your 24/7 AI coach trained on my entire body of work, ready to help you navigate tough moments in real time. Visit rogdrepair.com and use code SOMETherapist2026 to take half off your first month. And right now you're talking about examples of physical aggression and violence, but I think all of these have corollaries when it comes to psychological warfare. And I
Yes.
tend to think of gender ideology as to use a popular term here, a mind virus, and one that is specifically perfectly designed to attack people based on certain weaknesses. The profile that we see of the typical young person who falls for this has usually the majority. Sorry, I'm trying to be precise with my language, and maybe I'm weakening it a little bit. I would say that the typical profile of a young person who falls for this checks several boxes when it comes to the specific set of psychological weaknesses and vulnerabilities that can be exploited in this form of psychological warfare.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yes, and that is consonant with what I was just saying about when you do the developmental delay, and that's what it boils down to. You're locking in an identity before the development of an identity, and so what happens is that you're in these young people, you're probably eliminating a lot of their ability to defend themselves later, and not just physically, like you're saying, but in the 99 times out of 100, when it's metaphorical, when it's mental, when it's interpersonal, right? And yeah, we meet with bullies all the time, and we have to be able to deal with them. If you're not able to deal with them, they'll just walk all over you.
I have to tell you a story, something I observed the other day at the park with my family. Um, a little girl went up to her mom and she said, "Mommy, these kids were saying, you're black, you're brown, you're white." Like kids were labeling each other's skin color. And this girl was black and her mom was black. And she came up to her mom and she basically reported some, racial discrimination on the playground. I don't know the context, right? But she just tells her mom this is going on. And the mom, she doesn't miss a beat. She's just like, "Well, tell them you're an idiot." And I overheard this interaction and I just laughed. And I hope I didn't offend the mom when she heard me laughing, because I was laughing in a sympathetic way. I hope she didn't take offense. She had ignored me. But I just I thought, well, you know what? That's appropriate. Actually, that is appropriate. Like, but it's not how a lot of parents raise their kids, right? Because we want to be so gentle and compassionate and make everything so complicated. But really, is that what a 7 or 8-year-old can handle? Or does a 7 or 8-year-old need to keep it simple and say, "You're an idiot"? I think at that age, name calling in response to racism, probably appropriate. And then the mom went on to say, she was like, "Baby, what does God say about skin color?" "It doesn't matter." "That's right, your skin color doesn't matter." And so there was a little like of a softer talk that followed it up. But I thought, that's probably actually the kind of support that I needed when I was a kid and I was being bullied. For my skin color too, because I was a minority kid in um, the whites were the minority in my school, so kids were always making fun of my skin color. And what would it have been like if I had a mom who wasn't, so anxious about what to do, but who just said, "Well, tell him you're an idiot." You know, if I'd found that part of myself, maybe that would have been enough to get them to back down. I don't know. But I think, I mean, and I'll relate it to my own experience as a step parent too, because I I was so cautious entering these boys' lives, not wanting to mess up and, being this like nice therapist lady, right? And like it took me a couple years to learn that, especially my younger stepson, just based on his temperament, like you gotta be straight with him. And sometimes that means talking back, sometimes that means being aggressive, sometimes that means tickling him. I had to kinda let myself unlearn some conditioned responses to match his energy.
Yes, he's looking for that. He's looking to challenge you and have you push back. Boys are different this way. Girls get mad at each other and they become quietly hostile, right? Boys, if they disagree, they fight it out and then they're friends again. Um, and this is something that's very different between the sexes. You can observe it in nature, and it's very striking. And it's also similar to the way that men and women form different hierarchies. Women tend to have flattened hierarchies, whereas men tend to have vertical hierarchies. I mean, just these are differences in the human species that are discernible, and they're intangible, right? They're not biological in terms of we don't see them under a microscope. We have to observe them behaviorally. Um, and that again goes back to the origins of war. Hierarchy, right? If you look at army ranks, there are 21 army ranks. Okay, that's a hierarchy. Um, or the Masonic order, right? If you're into Freemasonry, there are like 33 orders. So it's a vertical hierarchy. Whereas, the history department at the university here, my friend who is retiring from there was just complaining the other day about how he doesn't understand the department anymore because women are 3/4 of the department, and they have changed the way the department runs so that it is no longer hierarchical. It is a flattened hierarchy. So you see this in any feminized, we talk about the feminization of certain uh, professions, for example, and that's one of the really big effects that it has is that it flattens hierarchies. Um, and in the case of the military, for example, that would be a bad thing. Whereas, if you were going to have nurses taking care of you, you don't want so much hierarchy between the 2 or 3 nurses that are taking care of you. You want them to be a little more egalitarian about um, sharing information about what's going on with your care, right? There are different situations where you want different things. You want different hierarchies. So it's actually good to have sex difference. It's good for the human race to have two types of people that are a little different in the way that they organize themselves. Um, it's not helpful to humanity to try to force everybody into one box, right? And sex difference is it's the primary split of humanity. And that's the first 2 boxes that we go into. It's like the top line item in assessing what somebody is and how somebody is predictably going to act. And so when we pretend that it doesn't exist, this actually debilitates us. It makes us less able to form an effective hierarchy, flat or vertical, because we're trying to make everything fit the same formula, right? Everybody's a blank slate. And that's probably one of the areas in which we have the most problem right now is that the reigning paradigm of our times is that everyone is a blank slate, right? A person who comes from society X will be exactly like person from society Y. They'll be exactly the same because they're both just human beings, and human beings are all the same. But no, somebody who comes from society X will be vastly different from society Y. The beliefs in one society, like say a society that believes in reincarnation, will be different from a society that is monotheistic, and has a heaven. So this is a complex topic area, right? But there's 1,000 ways in which the place that you're born shapes you before anything else does. So we are not blank slates. We're not born male and female the same, except the genitals. No, we're born actually very different, and we follow our differences, our genetic destiny, if you will. So there's a lot to be said for this. We need both men and women, and the problem with gender identity is that it erases the distinction, right? And it's not. We have 1,000 complaints about that, but here's one that we don't make often enough: is that it affects the way human society organizes itself, and it reduces our ability to have that differentiation and to have different skills and to make the most of what men and women each are, right? It actually makes us less competent as a species. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, and when you describe a common communication problem in mixed sex workplaces, for example, where women take offense in some settings to male ways of relating, and no offense is intended, those same ways of expressing themselves, if it were a purely male environment, might actually work perfectly fine for everyone there. But when women come in with our own sort of social mores, we're, you know, if a woman were to behave that way, it would be very offensive to other women. So then it gets interpreted in a way that adds layers of offense, which then makes the gap between the sexes wider because men are like, oh, women, they're so full of drama. Well, we know we're just interpreting male behavior through the lens of our female social patterns. What it makes me think of is this idea that, yes, I think toxic masculinity, that phrase was originally coined to point to some very real things. And it's been overexpanded now, so that a lot of healthy masculinity uh, doesn't feel like it has so much of a place in society anymore. But the thing that it makes me think of in our conversation today is like, if you think that's bad, wait till you see what replaces it in a world where we're not allowed to acknowledge sex differences, where we're not allowed to be honest and realistic about, men are like this and women are like this, and what does testosterone do to people and what does estrogen do? And if we're not able to acknowledge, these truths about who we are as people, or if we're not able to look aggression in the face or understand the nature of conflict, what takes the place of that? And I don't know the answer, but I've seen glimpses of it and it's not pretty. And one glimpse I've seen is sort of the worst of both worlds, right? When you deny sex differences, when you don't help young men find healthy and appropriate outlets for their masculine drives, including hierarchical outlets where they're told what their place is in the hierarchy. When young men don't have that, if you look at the direction that a lot of these young men's lives are taking, the ones caught up in gender ideology, it's like the aggression is still there, but it takes really nasty forms, right? And they're not learning to socialize like women, right? These young men who identify as women, they're not graceful and cooperative and considerate of each other's needs. They don't reflect the best of what women have to offer amongst other women. There are some lovely qualities to female friendship when we do it right. Like, women are so considerate of each other, and we talk about our feelings and relationships, and we build each other up, and they're maybe trying a little approximation of that, and it's a really tacky look on them. But what I notice with the young men, and then there's a different manifestation in the young women too, is like the worst of both worlds is what I see coming out. The worst of male aggression but like taking the form of like twisted female social aggression too, and like it just gets really nasty. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up because I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know how much entertainment you watch, but in the last 10 years, what has happened is that Hollywood has decided to flatten the difference between men and women. Um, because we want to present women as the heroes now. They have the girl boss, right? She's a female character. She's already perfect. She doesn't have to grow at all. She doesn't have to fail, right? Like a man does in the hero's journey. She doesn't have to fail and become better. She's already perfect, and everyone just needs to recognize how perfect she is. Why is this happening? And if you watch what happens, what the girl boss does, what they have done is they have taken toxic masculinity and made it female, a female character. You have these characters who don't behave like a woman, and that's the problem with this. Is why nobody watches this entertainment anymore, because women watch She-Hulk and go, "This is, I don't like this. This is not a woman I would want to know because she's behaving like a toxic man." Yeah, and so you have all these franchises and intellectual properties that have declined. Star Wars, for example, um, and that's where it comes from. That's why the girl boss has ruined all these franchises. They want to get rid of the sex difference. They want to promote the female, and what they end up doing is they take a male character and make her female, and it doesn't work. She doesn't come across as human. And you see this a lot of times in modern scripts. You have scenes where the dialogue is like from Mars. It's not humans talking. And it's because the people who are writing the scripts, they are that way. They come from these rarefied, elite Los Angeles academies or whatever. And they actually believe that men and women are not different. And so they write them as the same. And that is part of our cultural zeitgeist. So kind of a roundabout answer to your question is that one of the things that's been happening is that we're watching industries get basically destroyed by a denial of sex difference. And we're watching institutions in rapid decline because they don't want to admit that men and women are different or treat them differently or portray them differently. The hot thing in the last 10 years has been the female dating a younger man, for example. Well, okay, that happens, but I mean, is it? It's not really a compelling story, really. And these elements of like that particular element is supposed to be the flip. We're flipping the gender, right? We're taking the old paradigm of the older man with the younger woman. We're just flipping it, and it's going to work, but it never works. And it happens with all of these properties. And yeah, that's a good example of what you're talking about, I think, and where it leads.
So, as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm not really a movie buff myself, but my husband is, and I know he'll be interested in this, even if you mention a bunch of stuff I've never seen. I'm sure some audience members will appreciate the conversation as well. So, do you want to give us examples of films that portray this, and maybe in contrast, ones you think that do it better?
Let's start with One Battle After Another. That was the Oscar Best Picture winner this year. It lost $100 million at the box office. Nobody saw it. It's Hollywood self-congratulating, patting themselves on the back. And what is this movie about? It features a man, is the male character by Leonardo DiCaprio, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Um, who is absolutely useless and worthless and bumbling. And the female is perfect and toxic and sleeping around, and it doesn't matter. But she's a revolutionary. She's going to overthrow the system. And so you have this example of a movie that went nowhere, that Hollywood celebrated out the wazoo, that gets this woman completely. She's not a woman, right? She's not a real character. And the man is not a real character either. They're caricatures of something that's not even real. But then you can look at a movie, for example, uh, it, I would recommend actually that you take time to go see Project Hail Mary if you have not, because the women are real, the male characters are real, everybody acts like a real person. Sex difference definitely exists, even though there's not any sex in the movie. And even the alien character is a little rock alien, and he's a he, and that he acts like a he. And so everyone feels relatable in this movie. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a huge hit. It's going to make $1 billion because everyone who sees it relates to it. But no one related to the characters in one battle after another. And it's primarily because of the way the men and women were written. So there you go. That's a good example of those two films. But you can think about Star Wars. When was the last time you saw a Star Wars film? Just asking in general. It does not. There's no correct
Honestly,
answer.
literally never. Sorry. I
Well,
mean, my
that's
husband's
fine.
into it, but it's boy stuff.
Yeah, if you ask him, he's going to tell you the original trilogy is best. Okay, and then he's going to tell you that the George Lucas sequels from the first decade of the 21st century, they're not too good, but they look much better now because the sequel trilogy by Kathleen Kennedy is just awful. And if you watch the sequel trilogy, I'm not telling you to watch it, but if you watched it, you would notice this, that the women are not like women. They don't behave like women. The men don't behave like men. Men have been reduced to caricatures, and the girl is a boss. And that's one franchise that's been hollowed out by this. Another one, Indiana Jones. The last installment of Indiana Jones a couple of years ago, they actually were trying to kill off Indiana Jones. They had a time machine plot where he was going to die in the past, and this woman was going to put on his hat and go back to the future and be Indiana Jones from now on. And the test screening audience hated it. They hated it so much that they had to change the ending before they released it. And that's a good example of where they're trying to take a male role and make it into a female role. But let me ask you, you've probably seen Indiana Jones. You at least have seen like the picture of the guy with the
Long
hat,
time
right?
ago. Long time ago.
Okay, Harrison Ford, hat, bullwhip, dun 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 dun, adventure, right? And can you imagine a woman doing that? Can you imagine a woman as Indiana Jones? Because I kind of can't. I can imagine Indiana Jones with, and he does. He has a woman aside him, right? Who is part of the adventure. She's a full character. She takes part in things. She's not just there as a character to be saved or something. Uh, but he feels real. He feels like an actual man. She feels like an actual woman. And when you get away from that, you get a disaster that loses $1 billion.
I think this might be why I like historical fiction, even though I'm not a history buff. Like I'm not good at remembering things that happened a long time ago, but things
Interesting.
where I wasn't there. But like what's funny is the latest season of Outlander and the latest season of Bridgerton came out not too far apart. So I ended up watching them in pretty close succession. And the irony is that Outlander is the one that's actually science fiction. Outlander is the one that involves time travel. But Outlander feels real, and Bridgerton, which does not involve any
There you
time
go.
travel or other like science fiction elements, like Bridgerton is complete fantasy. I mean, they both take place a few hundred years ago, but the depiction of life, like one involves real people and it's gritty. And I mean, look, there's a lot of really disturbing stuff that you will see if you watch legit historical fiction. Women were treated
Yeah.
horribly. Like the heroine in Outlander was treated horribly when she time traveled to the past. And, you know, another one of my favorite historical dramas is Poldark. And yeah, it's brutal for women, but everything feels very visceral and real, and every man feels like a real man, and every woman feels like a real woman, and all the things women are going through feel very like quintessential to the human female experience.
It's interesting you say that because you have told me that you never liked history, but you love historical fiction. So what you actually enjoy are stories. You enjoy a good
Yes.
story.
Yeah.
Whereas, okay, so what men are doing with history, and most historians who ever lived were men, they are, men prefer things over people. So men are about what happened here. And so 1776, 1778, 1791, or something like that dates, right? And, that's probably just you're going, because you are more into the story with the people and what's going on in it. And you're fine with the plot. You get the plot, but what you're really into is the interactions of characters and if they feel real. Yes, and that's the interesting thing. All of these changes that I was just talking about in film were supposed to bring the female audience into the theaters. And what happened is the female audience shrank to nothing because it turns out that women tend to go with men to the theater. The men want to go see a movie and they take their girlfriend. And so what happened is that as men stopped being interested in this stuff, women stopped being interested in it even more. So yeah, there was a very interesting turn of events there that it was supposed to bring in these women and it achieved the opposite.
Well, and when you and I have talked about history in the past, I've said I think history is taught too young in retrospect. I mean, the amount of history that I was expected to learn as a kid, I think in midlife you have so much more of an appreciation for the common elements of the human experience. You've lived enough life to be able to relate to people in a completely different era and see how you're essentially made of the same stuff in a different context and how their decisions made sense. I mean, I have a lot of complaints about education not being very relevant to what young people actually need to know. And I'm not saying that young people shouldn't learn history, but I think the way that I was taught history, I was too young to appreciate it. And it's really honestly just through watching historical fiction that I feel like I become interested really in what happened and how it shaped people. But yeah, it's that human element. It's kind of the eternal struggle between good and evil and like choice and character and
Yes.
limitation. That's another element that you see in historical fiction. It's like limitation, resource limitation. Like that feels like even though none of us would want to forfeit modern comforts to be back there before artificial light and indoor heating and, all of that. Like, there's something so visceral about just being with the elements.
Yeah, it's interesting that anytime you read any of these back to nature types, and you start reading into them, all right, they want to give up industry, they want to give up electricity, they never want to give up indoor plumbing.
Yeah, sanitation. Like, if you've ever had a waterborne illness.
Yeah, if you've ever had just food poisoning, right, you understand the necessity of good hygiene. And it wasn't always so. People used to die of very preventable things all the time. Yeah, there are there are stories in history that might not interest me. There are stories in history that might not interest you. Really, it boils down to history is stories, and every historian is telling stories. And the idea that historians are some sort of neutral arbiters of fact, that's not true either. Every historian is telling stories their own way.
When it comes to people dying of things that are preventable, you see so much of that in historical fiction. I mean, you see so much of like, you know, a couple losing a baby to a fever, right? And then it's just pure tragedy. And that's what I love about these shows is like just it's pure tragedy. There's no other emotions mixed in there. It's just grief and it sucks and it's winter and your baby's dead and you're just mourning and that is all that's happened. And there's something so that like resets. I don't know, when I watch that kind of stuff, I'm like, "Oh yeah, life is suffering. Thank you for
You
acknowledging
know,
that."
you're
Like,
you're so on. Aristotle even wrote about that 2,000 years ago. You're spot on. Yes, we watch tragedy and it feels good to us. Why? Why is that? It's because when we watch the tragedy, we have the purgation of our own emotions, right? We have the feeling of, oh, that poor baby's dead, and those poor parents have lost their baby, right? And it's not real, so we don't have to feel it as we would feel it if it was us, right, like really happening to us. We would be, feel devastated by that. But we can watch the devastation of a fictional couple and we actually feel uplifted by it. We feel transformed by the experience. Yeah, that is an ancient piece of wisdom that you just hit on right there. Speaking of historians,
so speaking of being a historian, what's it like to be a military historian documenting the gender critical moment in time as it's occurring?
well, that's a good question. Uh, it's not like I'm documenting a battle, a real battle, but in a sense, it is a war that's going on, right? It's an ideological war. So what are the different fronts? We could say the prison front. We could say the sports front. We could say, that the International Olympic Committee was a battlefront, and we just won that battlefront. You could actually frame it that way. Um, and in a sense, that is, how this is working out, that we are contesting one issue space at a time on the same issue, right? And fundamentally, they all boil down to the same thing, but we're having to fight this out one state at a time, one country at a time, one issue at a time. And that is a campaign. It's not just one single event.
Let me add to your register my field. So the battles, the
Yeah,
battles over the counseling profession. We've got Varian versus Einhorn, which I released an episode about when it happened, and then we've got Childs versus Salazar. So
yeah,
we've got
you're
these like
spot on.
yeah, major progressions over the battle over the counseling profession, which is a huge culprit in what's gone on. Please continue.
You can see each of these as one particular part of a larger conflict. Yeah, and the conflict is being waged. We could look at the Cold War, communism versus capitalism, that kind of divide of ideology. That's kind of what's happening. It's an ideological conflict. Thankfully, it isn't, a shooting. Well, actually, let me correct that. Sometimes it is a shooting conflict. We've seen more and more of that. And why is that happening? And I would submit that it's happening because, again, the transgender ideology, not only is it interfering with normal development and helping we want young people to be able to process their feelings and get to be an adult without having to shoot up a school. Okay. And that's one part of it. Another part of it is that ideology gives permission. This is a fun fact, or not so fun fact. When the United States went to war in the Pacific in World War II, only 1 in 4 American riflemen would actually shoot their weapon at the Japanese. Why is that? It turned out that it was the training, that they were not training soldiers to recognize the enemy and shoot reflexively. And this is why when you go to the US Army basic training now, the targets on the shooting range, they pop up like this and they're human shaped. And that's because they're training you to be able to recognize that pop up target and shoot it without thinking about it. And one of the things that they found out in World War II is that the officer actually has to say, the sergeant has to say, open fire, shoot that guy. You actually have to give directions because people have a built-in limiter that prevents us from killing. Most people are not murderers, not natural-born killers. So they need permission in order to kill. And what does gender ideology do? It gives this sense of permission, this entitlement to get what you want. And if you don't get what you want, you're allowed to strike out with violence because you've been genocided. And this permission giving builds up, and that's how you get, the Audrey Hale Manifesto. You can read it in there. It's available in any transgender shooting incident. You can find out somewhere in their manifesto or in their video catalog. There's going to be, a turn towards violence because I have permission to do it. And that's what the ideology is doing. So this is part of our problem. And you were asking me earlier why I feel that it's dangerous. And that's one reason why. There are 1,000 ways in which gender ideology undermines our ability to regulate ourselves. And it puts that external locus of control out there so that someone else can harm you mentally. If somebody misgenders you, the angst, the anxiety level goes up, right? And so it's a dangerous ideology in that sense because it tends to lead to violence. We've seen it now. It tends to lead to people dysregulated and taking it out on the people around them. And that's an old story, and it's not exclusive to transgenderism, but transgenderism, I think, is like pouring a little bit of fuel on that fire. So yeah, this is a broad topic, but it's worth talking about, and I think we really need to regard transgenderism as not simply a threat to health, which it is, not simply a threat to mental health, which it is, but a threat to society, a threat to civilization. I don't say that lightly.
That reminds me of something you were saying earlier about the role of ideology in war. Seems like there's something you've noticed from studying the history of that. Can you flesh that out a little bit more? How the current ideology gives way to violence and what that has in common with how ideology has led to war in the past?
Probably the quintessential example of ideology in conflict would be Germany and the Soviet Union. Ideologically, they're actually cousins. The left doesn't want you to hear this, but it's true. So you have these two ideologies that had an epic conflict. It was brutal, right? Both sides are promoting the idea that the other side is inhuman. So the Germans are rolling through Russia and terrible things are happening to Russian civilians. And then, Russia comes the other way and terrible things are happening to German civilians. And terrible things have always happened in war, but now it's happening at this industrial scale. And so ideology has something to do with that. Ideology is being used to motivate what we would call war crimes. Ideology is being used to motivate horrors and atrocities. Ideology is being used to motivate the soldier in battle. And you think, okay, now I understand the soldier in battle. I can understand we want him motivated. But the problem is the spillover, that what happens in the other 99% of the time, because you only spend 1% of the time in battle when you're a soldier. The other 99% of the time, the ideology is still present. So one of the interesting things about that war is that even though the civilian casualties and civilian, let's call it bad things happening to civilians. The rate is the same as other wars, but the numbers are much higher. So you have the same ratio. It's almost a golden ratio, 2-to-1 of male to female. That civilians who are occupied in wartime, 2 men will die for every woman, whereas women, of course, suffer other forms of violence. And that is the same in this one particular conflict. So it's like the same as any other conflict, except worse. And one of the reasons why it's worse, one of the key reasons, is because both sides are so hopped up on ideology. Ideology has driven, like Pol Pot killed a quarter of the population of Cambodia with ideology, right? How did he do that? He convinced young men with guns of his ideology, and he gave them permission and orders to go out and do what they did. And so now you're talking about transgenderism, okay? What does transgenderism do? It is an ideology that tells a young man, you're entitled, these people are against you, you have the right to lash out against those who won't give you what you want. And then beyond the individual level, right, at the group level, there's this whole idea of a transgenocide, and it's totally believed. I don't know if you saw that video was floating around yesterday of some woman at a Democratic Party meeting of some kind. I think it was Pete Buttigieg. She was asking, how do we prevent the concentration camps for the transgender people? Because she really believes this. And if she believes it, she'll act on the belief. One of the ways that she'll act on that belief is by trying to put you in jail. So the violence that can happen to you, right, as a result of a broader picture of ideology, not just a person, but a whole lot of people who are hopped up on this ideology. Any bad idea, one person can have a bad idea and they're just a dummy with a bad idea. A whole lot of people with a bad idea is very, very dangerous. That's how wars happen, usually, is somebody with a really bad idea. So, yes, there are, some limits to this metaphor, but yes, I see it in terms of both the individual and at scale, that it is a threat, not just to our freedom, right? Our freedom of speech, our freedom to use the pronouns that we see, the freedom of a girl to have a fair competition at sports, that kind of thing. Those are all important. But I see it as a serious threat to the safety of the public, the safety of the non-believer, right? And to the safety of things like the Constitution. Because if you can force people to use pronouns, well, you've just done away with the First Amendment, haven't you? So yeah, there are ways in which I see this as really undermining the core values of civilization in ways that lead towards violence or disorder or authoritarianism in response to disorder. It's just not, it's not a clean ideology that you can just dismiss that, oh, well, people just believe that funny thing. It has dangers for us, real dangers. And I would argue that we would be better off, or we would benefit more from a little bit of fear towards the potential consequences of this ideology at scale in a decade, in 2 decades, if it's not defeated now, if we don't restore some normalcy, the consequences for all of us could be dire. The consequences for humanity could be dire. And that's before we even talk about things like, the population crash, because the fertility rate has gone down. And why is that? Some of it has to do with the ideology that says, hey, kid, you can sterilize yourself. It's fine. So, there are a number of levels on which it is destabilizing and destructive and ends in violence. Because when civilizations go down, it's usually, a long process. It's not all at once, but at some point, there is violence usually. So we could go there, and we could have, after even you and I are gone, unchecked gender ideology could actually kill us all. And I saw that in 2020 when I talked to my professor, and I'm still carrying that with me today. It is what keeps me in this fight. We have to win it, otherwise we're doomed.
Matt, what are a few ways that you could see us going from here?
Well, one way that we go, of course, is that we reestablish uh, binary human sex reality as the starting point for law and society. Um, and that is no guarantee that everything will turn out fine. But things will not turn out fine if we keep going down this path. If we keep going down this path that we have been going down, if, let's say, a Democrat is elected in 2028 and says, every kid gets to go on puberty blockers now, um, that road ends in disaster. It ends in social disaster. It ends in civilization disaster. And at some point, it ends in violence. And the reason why is because it will produce three things. The three things that cause wars, going back to Thucydides, we're talking thousands of years of wisdom here: fear, honor, and interest. And what's going to happen is, if society is no longer capable of defending itself, if civilization is crumbling, then fear will be everywhere, dishonor will be everywhere, and people will defend their interests. You will get wars. And, some people are probably still thinking, Matt, I don't know if I buy this formula. But let me tell you, if you go through history, you will find that conflicts have started for the strangest reasons. They have started over a pig, over a bucket. There have been wars over feathers. So, there are 1,000 reasons, 10,000 reasons, a million reasons why people will kill each other. So if you want to find out just how many ways or how many reasons people can have to kill each other, just have a breakdown of society, have a breakdown of civilization that results from nobody knowing who they are or who anybody else is. That comes from none of us knowing, none of us being able to predict or act on the prediction of behavior by somebody according to whether they're male or female. You're going to end up with violence at some point, sooner, later, somewhere.
Do you think we're already there?
Well, I think you're seeing that with the shootings, aren't you? I think that that's a pretty good argument for this point of view. And actually, even when I talked to that professor, I even imagined that. I thought, we'll get transgender mass shooters probably. And then it happened. So, there's maybe I'm wrong, but that makes me feel right. It feels confirming. Certainly, when Audrey Hale shot up the Covenant School in Nashville, that made me think, oh, yeah, maybe that idea of mine about ideology, maybe even testosterone. Is she on testosterone? I don't know whether she was on testosterone. It's not clear to whether she was or not. But yeah, either way, these two things, either one of them, can lead to this disaster. She might not have been okay in the first place. She seemed to have mental illness issues to begin with. But then you compound those with an ideology that gives her a reason to ruminate constantly, and then gives her a reason to act out. Permission. So yes, this was a realization that is still propelling me today.
Are you a free-thinking therapist looking for like-minded community? The Association for Mental Health Professionals is a sanctuary for holistic, critical thinking counselors and therapists who want to stand firm in our values and reclaim our profession from ideologues. AMHP offers its members a blog and podcast, monthly webinars, and an annual conference each fall in Texas. Visit associationformentalhealthprofessionals.org to join a growing number of like-minded therapists who want our profession back. All right, now back to the show. You did begin to answer my last question, or 2 questions ago, when I said where it could go. I think your first answer was starting on a more positive note about, if we draw the line about biological reality. What else can you say about more positive outcomes that actually appear likely from a historical perspective?
Okay, well, first off, for 3,000 years, women had the wrong bodies for sports. That was the justification. And then for 50 years, we had Title IX, and then suddenly women's bodies didn't exist anymore. So the recognition of female sports, we restore female sports, the integrity thereof. And, not only does that preserve sports for women, but it becomes a story of preservation. It becomes a history of preservation. And furthermore, the more battles we win, right? Prisons, sports, pediatric transition, restrooms. You start winning these fights, and it becomes a history of winning. It becomes a history of gender ideology was tried, rejected. And that's the story we want. We want people in 100 years to be talking about that weird time that people were running around pretending to be the opposite sex, and it had all these effects that were not good, and people pushed back, and things were restored, and that should be the story. We want that to be a positive story. There's going to be always gender nonconforming people. The positive outcome would be that we come out of this with an acceptance of gender nonconformity as natural variation in human beings. That some men are a little feminine. It's just a character trait. There's some women are a little masculine. It's a character trait. It's like being, any other kind of character trait. You might be smart, you might be dumb, you might be quick, you might be slow. The point is, character traits ought to be accepted as a variation. And hopefully we come out of this accepting these character traits in gender nonconforming people as normal and natural variation. Of course, the dim prospect is that we come out of this rejecting nonconformity at all. And there are, even in the gender critical movement, right, there is a fight between those who want to accept levels of gender nonconformity and those who reject all gender nonconformity. And so that can go one of 2 ways. I would hope that we get it right. I hope that we make room and space for people to be different from each other, to be diverse in their personalities, and not have to crush anybody under strictures about their behavior. Another issue is that we have, for example, young people who are being indoctrinated. We talk about this all the time. One way we could go is that we rediscover youth, childhood, right? You have to kick the child out, go outside, go play outside. Don't come back till dinner. That was the way it was when I was a kid. Your mom kicked you out of the house. Go outside and play. We could get back to that. We could get back to doing away with screens. And you're seeing that now. I think it was Sweden. They just did away with all screens and education. It's back to papers and books and, notebooks. We could go back and we could restore childhood. That is a positive outcome. The negative outcome, of course, is that we end up with this blurred line of progress that a child is a small adult and treated like an adult. And adults, by the way, are also children, and we have to treat the adults like children. And you see that now. You see both of those things, right? And they go together. They're actually confident. They're not separate things. They're the same thing. So yeah, we could go one way and restore childhood, or we could continue to blur the lines between adults and children.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you, but when you started talking about getting kicked out to go outside and play, I was going to tease you for sounding like every Gen Xer I've ever met. And while I am fully in support of a Gen X childhood, for I think it'd be a lot better for what are we on now? Alpha. Is there something after alpha yet? I don't know. But um we're not going back to the 70s and 80s, right? And while we can try to create safe neighborhoods with yards and parks and encourage children to go outside and ride their bikes and kick a ball around and climb a tree with the neighbor, we can certainly encourage all those things, but at the same time we're not going back. Do you see a way forward given the technologies that we currently have? Do you see a way forward that makes sense for the younger generations? I mean, here's one little, like, crumb I can give you, right, is that we're increasingly hearing reports of kids who are growing up seeing this nonsense being shoved down their throats by their aging teachers, or they're seeing their older siblings go trans, and it feels like a huge loss to them, and they feel like their siblings are misguided, or, there is an element of the younger kids rebelling against this stuff that feels old. That's starting to happen. At the same time, I regret to inform my listeners that the middle school pansexual to non-binary to trans pipeline is still alive and well, unfortunately, because I'm meeting new parents and middle schoolers every single week. So it's not completely expired. But any thoughts on any of that, Matt?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but young people seem to be doing it themselves. They are starting to want analog things. They are starting to demand older things. One of the great trends that's going on right now, I don't know if you're aware of this, video game industry is in free fall. It's the worst time for the video game industry since the 1980s and the fall of Atari. That Atari went belly up. It's a famous story. But the point is that this change is having young people would rather play Super Mario, right, a game from 1989, than something that's brand new that is supposed to look spectacular. And this is like a kind of retro thing that kids are doing. So I actually feel like the kids are pretty based. I think that um, the worse it kind of gets at the top of that pipeline, like you're talking about, kids who are way down here, I think now are starting to see ahead of themselves, and they're turning away from that. And they're starting to pick up analog things again. They're starting to like puzzles. Puzzles are apparently a big thing with kids now. So I don't know. I feel hopeful. I don't think we can go entirely back, right? You can't. The past is an undiscovered country. You can never go there. But I think that what is happening is that people look to the past, even children, and they want things that were simpler, that were more authentic, that feel real. Um, I am struck, for example, by the very first time that or somebody's, I had a child some years ago, their very first time playing Dungeons and Dragons with me, or ever, was with me. And, they had been playing video games with fantasy elements for a long time. And an hour into playing the tabletop game, he was having so much fun. He said, "This is way better than a video game." And I think about that sometimes because, Wizards of the Coast, they ruined the game for a while. They wokeified it. They made the orcs into Mexicans, and people were complaining about it. And now the company's like, whoa, we got to go back. And kids are, I think kids are going to pick that up again. I think that they're going to come and find the tabletop game and find that sitting around the table with their friends is way better than doing it online. But I could be wrong. Anyway, I think what will happen is that we will find a mix. I think that we will be able to figure it out so that children are exposed to screens enough that they can be, competent with the technology as they grow up, but they're not on the screen all the time. I think some of that's going to be about the law. We're going to have some laws. In China, for example, the kid can't be on TikTok for more than 59 minutes. And we need something like that, I think. We need to limit screen time for kids. But, you can only do that. So, there's only so many things you can do that with. It's going to take a certain amount of social change, of people going backwards, of parents saying, you know what, I'm not going to give the child a screen. I'm going to give them a flip phone at age 11. And in the meantime, they're going to have art supplies and they're going to have a dirt pile in the backyard, right? So I think that actually it's going to be a mix of things. I think we're going to have to adapt to technology and bring back analog activities that really nourished us, that made us human, that made us better, and that made society. But the biggest thing that we're going to have to change is that, we have basically stopped talking to each other, adults. We don't hang out as much as we used to. There's the old bowling alone paradigm, right? I see the future is either going to be people learn to connect again. And what has gender ideology done about that? Gender ideology has cut a lot of connections, right? Breaking up families, breaking up friendships. So either people are going to reconnect, or the disconnection is going to become complete. And that's when, again, things are going to get bad. So we have to connect. We have to find our way back to at least some measure of normal childhood. And this will not be so easy. It'll be controversial. It'll be a fight, but it's a fight worth having. I hope that I have answered your question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer and a good note to close on. So, thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to chat with you again, Matt, and remind people where they can find you. I think you have 3 different websites, and we were going to make sure you explained why.
Yeah, you can find my gender critical work at thedistancemag.com. I have a podcast interview with Admiral Christine at the HHS later this week. That will be posted probably by the time you get this podcast up. He is the one who has replaced Admiral Rachel Levin. So I'm going to try to get him to dish on his predecessor. I'm sure it'll be juicy. I write a lot about stuff there. If you want to read military history writing, you can find me at polemology.net. Polemology, P-O-L-E, polemology is the scientific study of war. And I write about everything else at osborneinc.com, and I write about a lot of things there. Politics, culture, just whatever you have that isn't gender or war.
So, we'll make sure to include links in the show notes to The Distance Mag, Polemology, and Osborne Inc. And people can follow you on X. Are you down to 1 account now, or do you still have 2 or 3?
There are 3 accounts. Like there's a Distance Mag account that just tweets articles, and then there's a Polemology account that just tweets articles. I'm on osborneinc.com if you want to come find me. If you just want to follow the content, you can follow either one of those.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been fun. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for listening to You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly take a moment to rate, review, share, or comment on it using your platform of choice. And of course, please remember, podcasts are not therapy. and I'm not your therapist. Special thanks to Joey Pecoraro for this awesome theme song, Half Awake, and to Pods by Nick for production. For help navigating the impact of the gender craze on your family, be sure to check out my program for parents, ROGD Repair. Any resource you heard mentioned on this show, plus how to get in touch with me, can all be found in the notes and links below. Rain or shine, I hope you will step outside to breathe the air today. In the words of Max Ehrmann, with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.